In this section, we're gonna learn about Vue.js basic concepts such as interpolation, directives, attribute bindings, conditional rendering and list rendering, style and class bindings, handling events, two-way bindings with the Vue model, methods, computer properties, and watcher. After you finish this section, you'll have a simple reusable tags input like this. In here, you can type something. Then, once you hit Enter key or Tab key, or even you type comma, you'll see that it's being added to the list. You can remove the item from the list by hitting this X button. Or, if the text box is empty, you can remove the last item in the list by hitting the backspace or delete button. Okay, let's get started. In this lesson, we're gonna see how to create or install our Vue.js project. There could be many different ways to install Vue.js app, but in this lesson, I'm gonna show you how to install it using build tool, in this case, Vue CLI and Fit. Alright, let's firstly see how to use Vue CLI. So, in order to create Vue.js app using Vue CLI, we need to install its package in our local machine using this command npm install-g add vue/CLI. Note that we specify -g, which means we install it as a global package. Just hit enter to install it. Once it's installed, we can create a Vue.js project by using this command vue create followed by the project name you want to create. In my case, I'll call my project as app-1. Hit enter. Here you can choose default Vue 3 with bubble and ESLint option, or you can also choose the last option to manually select what feature that you want to use. If you are new in Vue.js, I suggest you to unselect this linter or formatter so that you can focus learning Vue and getting familiar with Vue syntax. Next step is choosing the version, in this case, version 3.x. Then, in the next step, we choose where our configuration file will be placed. Just choose in dedicated config files. Last, I'll say n, then hit enter. And now, all dependency and dev dependency packages that required to build our Vue.js app will be installed. And it could take some time, so I'll come back when it's finished. Okay, once installation complete, here we see two instructions. Change directory to our project and start up our local development server. So let's cd in there, cd app-1, then run our local development server by running npm run serve. Here we see that we can access our project using this URL http localhost:8080. Let's go to our browser, then enter that URL http localhost:8080. And here we get Vue.js welcome page displayed on the screen. Alright, let's switch back over to our terminal. Then kill our dev server by hitting Ctrl+C. Now, let's see how to install Vue.js project using Vite. Let me go one folder up. So, unlike Vue CLI, Vite does not need us to install any package. Not only that, Vite also supports other frameworks such as React, Preact, and Svelte. Okay, to create Vue project, we can use this command npm init vite add latest, or if you prefer using yarn, you can just say yarn create vite. Since I prefer to use npm, so I'll be using npm init vite add latest. Let's hit enter. And here you can call your project with any name you like. I'll call it app-2. Then we'll select Vue and then Vue. Okay, scaffolding Vue project is done. And here we see some instructions. So let's cd to our app. Then install the dependencies using npm install. I'll come back when it's finished. Once that's done, we can run our development server using npm run dev. Okay, here we can access our app using localhost 3000. So let's go back to our browser and enter localhost 3000. And here we get Vue 3 with Vite welcome page. It's much simpler than our previous app, which built by Vue CLI. So now that we have two Vue.js projects using two different tools, it's up to you to choose one. But in my case, I'll be choosing the second one, which is built by Vite, because in my opinion, Vite using less dependencies than Vue CLI, because Vite using native ES module, while Vue CLI is built on top Webpack. In addition, running Vite app is much faster because there's no bundling process. So here, I'll go one folder up, then rename my second project to tags input. Alright, let's move on to the next lesson, where we'll learn about single file component. In this lesson, we'll learn about single file component, or SFC. Here, I've already opened my Vue project in VS Code, and my development server is already run. So let's go to src folder. This is basically a folder where we put our code of our app. And if we take a look, we'll find one or two files in .vue file. The file with .vue extension is called SFC, or single file component, because that file represents a single component declaration. This app.vue is a main component which will house other components. Let's open that file. As you can see here, a single file component contains script, template, and style. The script is a place where we put our component's logic and data. Here you'll see setup attribute, which basically is syntactic sugar for using composition API in the single file components. We're not gonna use it for now, so let's get rid of that from here, then clear everything inside here. The next part in SFC is template, where we define our component structure. Basically, it contains HTML markup. And for now, let's show a message. In heading 1, let's say hello world. The last part is style. In here, we could define some styles that's specific for the current component, or styles that would be applied for other components that placed in this component. If for some reason we just want to apply the styles only in this component and not affect other components, which could be placed in here, we could add scoped attribute. For now, I'll remove it from here because I want to make my styles global. And in this style definition, I'll remove this text align center. Then I'll try to define new styles for the heading 1. Let's say color blue. If I give it a save, then see in my browser, here I get hello world message displayed on the screen with blue color. Okay, now it's time to create our first SFC. Let's go to Components folder. Let's firstly remove this file. And then we'll create a new one. Let's call it tags input.view. Let's add template. And for now, let's add an input element. So now that we have our new component, the next thing that we need to do is to register it so that other component can use it. We can register our component in two ways, local or global. Let's firstly see how to register our component locally. Let's go to app.view. And in this component, we'll register the tags input component as local component. So here in the script, we import the component, import tags input from components tags input. We'll then add export default an object. Then inside that, we add components. In this property, we specify our component tags input. Alright, once the component registered locally, we can use it in the template section of our component. To call our local component, we can write it in kebab case like this, tags input. Or we can even use single tag like this. Another way writing our local component is in Pascal case, whether in pair tags or single tag like so. Let's keep this safe and have a look. Okay, here we have 3 inputs displayed on the screen. Now, let's see how to register our component globally. Before we do that, let's remove this line. If we save the change and see in our browser, we no longer see our inputs. And if we take a look in our browser console, we'll find this error. Okay, to register our component globally, we need to access our Vue.js instance, which is stored in main.js. So let's open that file. So here, we created Vue.js instance using this createApp function and pass the app component. Since this function returns Vue.js instance, let's assign that into a variable. Let's say app. We'll then mount the instance to an element using mount method. Now, let's import the tags input component. Then, before we mounting the Vue instance, let's call component method. This method receives two arguments. The first one is the custom tags, let's say tags input. Then, in the second argument, we pass the component itself. In this case, tags input. So, that's how we register our component globally. Let's give this save and have a look. Now we have two inputs displayed on the screen. And we still find error, failed to resolve component tags input. This is because when we register our component globally, our custom component is exactly the same with what we defined in the first argument of component method. So it's a bit different when we register component locally, which allows us to write them in kebab case or Pascal case. So in here, let's remove in the template this component calling. Let's give this another save. And now we no longer see any error. Alright, let's switch back over to tags input component. And now let's add data to this component. We'll add script, then add data method, which return an object. In this case, we'll add tags in array, which contains, let's say, Vue, React, and Angular. We can also write our data in arrow function like so. Now, in template, we can display our data using interpolation written in double curly braces. So, let's try to display tags array inside a div. We can do that like this. Let's also add another div and display how many items in tags array. Let's give this a save and take a look. Here we see tags array element displayed on the screen, and we see below that 3, which is the number of elements in tags array. So, inside these curly braces, we can put any JavaScript expression. It could be arithmetic or other expression, maybe tags 0 index to uppercase. As you can see, we got 4 and Vue in uppercase. Alright, now let's see how to use directives in Vue.js. Directives are basically special HTML attribute which allows us to manipulate the DOM. In Vue.js, directives prefixed by v- to distinguish with native HTML attribute. For example, here we can use v-text, which has same functionality with interpolation. Then I'll pass to it tags.length, and I'll remove it from here. If we save the change and see in our browser, we get the same thing. Another directive that we can use is vif, which allows us to show an element if the condition that's specified is met. Let's replace this v-text with vif. Let's say we want to show this div if we don't have any tags. So it's gonna be exclamation tags.length. Inside this div, you have no any tags. Enter it in the input. If we save the change and take a look in our browser, here we cannot find the message. But if we clear the tags in here, now we see the message. Okay, another directive which commonly used is v4. This directive allows us to display a list of items using the data from an array. Let's add another div. Then we add to it v4. This directive needs special syntax in form of item in items, where item is an alias for the array element that's being iterated on, while items is the data source array. In this case, it's gonna be tag in tags. Inside the div, let's display the tag. Now, in some cases, we might need to access the array index. To do that, we can wrap the alias, then specify the index. Let's display that in here. Let's give this a save and see in our browser. Okay, here we see our tags with their index displayed on the screen. Alright, let's see one last directive, which is vbind. This directive allows us to do attribute bindings. The attribute binding itself is a mechanism to control attribute's value of an element dynamically. The vbind directive receives an argument, which is the attribute name that we want to control. Then we pass to it JavaScript expression, which then will be evaluated and apply the result to the attribute that we specified. Okay, before we using this directive, let's go to input element. As you already know that this element has value attribute, which allows us to determine its value. Let's say svelte. Let's give this a save and take a look. Here we see in this input svelte. Now let's go back to our editor. Then define in our data a new property. Let's say new tag. And we'll set it with preact. Now to bind this property to value attribute of this input, we can use vbind : then followed by the attribute name, in this case value, then pass to it our data, in this case new tag. So that's how we use vbind directive to bind data to any attribute of an element, such as value, ID, class, style, src, and so on. Last but not least, we can use shorthand syntax for vbind directive. So instead of using vbind : attribute, we can just say : attribute. Much simpler, right? That's it for this lesson. Let's move on to the next one and see how to handle event. In this lesson, we're going to learn about how to handle event in Vue.js. So, event is something that happens inside HTML element. It can be triggered by the browser or by user. For example, a page has finished loaded, a button clicked, an input changes, mouse move, a form submitted, and so on. There are two things that we will do when working with events. First, listening event. We do that by specifying the event type on the element. In native JavaScript, the event is prefixed by on. For example, on click, on input, on change, and so on. Second, handling event, which is doing something when an event occurred. The implementation can be any JavaScript expression or calling a function. Alright, here below this input, let's add a button. Let's say OK. So here we'll be adding everything inside this input into tags array once we click on this button. With native JavaScript, we can use onClick, but in Vue.js, we can use vOnDirective followed by : followed by the event type, in this case click. Then inside that, we can put any JavaScript expression. Since we want to push the value to tags array, we can pass to it tags.push, and since we have bound the value attribute of the input to new tag, so here we can pass to the push method the new tag. Let's keep this safe and have a look. Let's click on the OK button. Here we see that preact added to the list. Now let's try to change the value to something else. Let's say nest.js, then hit OK button again. Unfortunately, it's not work as expected. The old value is still added to the list and not the new one. We'll fix this shortly. For now, let's see how to handle the queue event, especially queueDown event. So, an input element has several events that we can utilize. One of them is queueDown. The queueDown event will be occurred when we press a key on our keyboard. The event fires multiple times if we press and hold the key. Vue.js provides some modifiers for key events such as enter, tab, delete, and so on. You can check out the Vue.js documentation for more information about them. So here in this input, we'll be adding its value to text array when we hit enter key. Here we simply add v_on key down dot enter, and for the command that we will attach, let's take it from the OK button, or maybe we just get rid of the button and paste it here. Remember that the old value of the input that is gonna be added to the text array if we pass the new tag. Now, since we're inside the input, we can replace the new tag with event object through $event. We can then take the actual value from the input using .target.value. Let's give it a save and have a look. Let's hit enter. Okay, the value added to the list. Let's now change to something else. Then hit enter again. Okay, now it works as expected. Now, beside enter key, what if we also want to be able to add the value to the list when user hit the tab key? Well, it's very easy. Just add another v_on key down, then apply tab modifier. Since the tab key will move the focus to another element, we need to use another modifier that will modify its default behavior. In this case, we'll be using .prevent. Let's give it another save and take a look. I'll enter something in here, then I'll hit the tab key. Okay, it added to the list. Great! Now, before we end this lesson, I'm gonna show you a shorthand syntax for the v_on directive. So, we can replace the v_on with ampersand. If we save this, we'll get the exact same thing. In this lesson, we'll learn about two-way bindings in Vue.js. Okay, let's start by change this back to new tag as we did before. We'll now see how to change the new tag's value as soon as we make change in the input. Let's also print out the new tag on the screen. Let's give it a save and have a look. Now, let's change our input. As you can see, the new tag's value is remained the same. This is a normal flow, which is one data flow from our data to the DOM, in this case, value attribute of the input element. So any change that occurred in the DOM or input will not affect our data or new tag in this case. Now, to make the new tag reflect the change of input element, we can utilize input event of the input element. The input event occurred when value attribute of input element changes. So here, we'll add v on input, instead that we'll assign to new tag the $event target.value. Let's give this save and take a look. Let's change the value. Okay, now we see the new tag reflects the change of the input element. And if we hit enter, it being added to the list. So what we just did here is something called two-way binding or two-way data binding, because now the changes occurred in two directions, data to DOM and DOM to data. We did that manually, but actually Vue.js provides a directive which simplifies that process. The directive is vModel. So let's replace both of these with vModel and pass to it new tag. If we save the change and see in our browser, we get the same result. Now, the vModel directive also provides some modifiers that we can use. So by default, we're able to add white spaces on the left or on the right side of the text, as we see here. If we want to remove white spaces from the value of the input that we have bound, we can add trim modifier. If we save the change, then try adding white spaces in the input. Now, we no longer see any white spaces. Besides trim, you can use other modifiers such as lazy and number. You can check out Vue.js official guide to get more information about those modifiers. If we take a look at this keydown event handling, here we put a JavaScript expression directly. Putting a single JavaScript expression like this is fine, but if we need more code or need more complex logic, we need to put that into a method and call it in here. For this case, when we hit Enter key or Tab key, before we add the value to the text array, we need to check it first. Because if we clear the input, then hit Enter key or Tab key, if we take a look, here we see empty tags added to the list. Also, after we type a tag and hit enter, here we need to reset the text in this input. So now, let's use method in here. Let me copy this expression, then make selection to both of these. Then we'll call a method, let's say add new tag, which we will create shortly. Let's now go to script section, then add a new property called methods. Inside here, let's define the add new tag method, then paste the previous code. Unlike in template, here in this object scope, we need to add this. So these tags push this new tag. So before we add our new tag into tags array, let's make sure that the new tag's value is not empty. If this new tag, Then we move this into here. After new tag added, we clear its value. This new tag equal empty string. Let's give this a save and have a look. Let's type something in here, then hit enter or tab key. Alright, now our new tag added to the list and the input now empty. If we now try to hit enter key or tab key when the input empty, as you can see, we no longer have empty tags added to the list. Okay, let's add another method. But before we do that, let's add a button on each tag, which is gonna use to remove the tag from the list or tags array. So here, after we show the tag, let's add an anchor element. Then we add ampersand times an HTML special character which will render an X character. Then we add click event with prevent modifier to prevent anchor's default behavior, which will pointing us to any location that's specified in href attribute. Then we'll call a method, let's say remove tag, and pass the index in. Okay, let's go back to methods property. Then define the remove tag. It receives an argument, index, and inside that, we'll remove an item in a certain index from the tags array. In this case, we use splice method, pass to it index in the first argument, and 1 in the second argument. Let's give it a save and take a look. Let's click on the X button. Okay, the tag removed from the screen. Last, let's add another method where we'll remove the last tag when we hit the delete key or backspace key. So here in this input, let's add v on key down dot delete, then call a method, let's say remove last tag. Back to methods property, then define the remove last tag. Inside this method, we simply call the remove tag and pass to it the index of the last element. We can do that by finding the total element of the array using this tags dot length minus 1, since index of array is start from 0. And we need to make sure that removing the last tag only occurred if the input is empty. If this new tag dot length is equals 0. If we are not doing this, the last tag will always get removed when we want to make correction on the tag that we are typing in. Let's give it a save and take a look. Let's add a new tag, then hit enter. Okay, a new tag added. Now let me enter another tag. I'll make a bit correction to it by hitting the delete key. It's still working fine. Now I have my input empty. If I now hit delete or backspace, as you can see, the last tag will be removed. In this lesson, we'll learn about style and class bindings. Let's firstly see the style binding. Style binding is how we control the value of style attribute on an element dynamically. For example, here let's say we want to change the input text color to red when we try to enter any tag that exists in the tags array. For this case, we can use style binding. Okay, before we perform style binding, let's do that manually, like so. As you can see, the input text now red. Now we'll apply this color only if we try to enter duplicate tag. So here we add vbind before style, or we can simply write :style. Then we pass to it JavaScript expression. In this case, we call tags array, then use includes to check if value that passed to it exists in the array. Then we pass in the new tag. So if new tag includes in tags array, then we apply the color red. Otherwise, we apply nothing. Let's give it a save and take a look. Let's type a tag that already exists. As you can see, the color now in red. If we enter non-existing tag, the color back to normal. Now, for simple styling like we have here, using string is fine, but for a bit complex styling, it's better writing it in object notation. Let's take a look. Let's say, beside changing the text color to red, we also want to add line through effect to the text. Here, let's replace our style to object. Inside that, we define color with red, then text decoration to line through. We use quote in here since it has dash character. Let's give it a save and take a look. Okay, now we have color red and line through effect on duplicate tag. And that's how we perform style binding. Now, let's see how we perform class binding. So, class binding is a way to control the class attribute's value on an element dynamically. It's almost the same as style binding. In class binding, we can use string, object, or even array. But in this video, I'm going to show you just string and object. Alright, let's cut this style definition. Then, outside template, let's add style with scoped in order to apply the style only in this component. Inside that, let's define a selector called tag exist. And inside that, we paste the previous style. Let's make a bit adjustment. Now, to apply this dynamically in this input, we'll replace this with class. The expression is similar, except we apply the class that we have defined in style section. Tag exists. So if new tag exists in tags array, we'll apply tag exists to the class attribute. Let's give it a save and have a look. Okay, we get the exact same thing. We can also make this into object notation instead of string. As a note, when you're writing object notation in class binding is that the property object is the CSS class that would be applied, while the value of the property is Boolean. If the value is true, the class will be applied. Otherwise, if the value is false, the class would never be applied. So here we can say tag exists. Tags includes new tag. Just like this. If we save this change, we get the exact same result. If we try to enter duplicate tag, we'll see that it's in red color. But if we hit enter or tab key, we can still add that to the list. So what we need here is to add another check before the tag being added to the list. Let's go to add new tag definition. Then in this if statement, we'll add AND operator, then add another condition if new tag not exists or includes in tags array. So if we have new tag and it does not include in tags array, we'll add that to tags array. Let's give it a save and take a look. Okay, now we cannot enter any tag which already exists in the list anymore. Now, if you realize here, we use the similar logic, which is check the new tag whether it exists in tags array or not. It's a simple computation though, but if you follow dry or don't repeat yourself principle, then you'd never doing that way. You could define that in a method, but in Vue.js we can define computed property. So here, let's add computed property. Defining a computed property is almost the same with defining a method, except it cannot have any argument. Let's say is tag exists. Computed properties are cased based on their reactive dependencies, meaning that a computed property will only re-evaluate when some of its reactive dependencies have changed. Here we add return, then copy and paste this code, and now we can replace this with not this is tag exists. Now, one more advantage using computed property is that we can call it without need to include parentheses, just like this. Let's also replace this one with is tag exists. Let's give it a save and take a look. Let me enter duplicate tag. It's now in red and strike through. If I try to hit enter or tab key, we get the exact same thing. The tag cannot be added to the list. In this lesson, we're gonna learn about watchers. A watcher is a special feature in Vue.js that allows you to detect changes of component data. It might sound similar to computed property, but watcher usually used to watch a property change and perform certain actions. Let's add watch property. Inside that, let's define a function with the same name with the property name that we want to watch. In this case, we want to watch the new tag, which is defined in data. So here we make a function new tag. We could also get new value and old value of the property that's being watched by specify arguments like so, new val, old val. For now, let's try to print the new value and old value to the console. Let's give it a save and take a look. Let's open up our browser console. Go to input and enter something in here. As you can see in the console that the new value and old value are printed out whenever we make change to the new tag that's bound to this input. Okay, we're watching the new tag. Now, let's add the new tag that we are typing in to text array as soon as we type comma. Let's get rid of the second argument since we don't need that for our case. We'll then replace this console log with if statement if new file index of comma is greater than -1. So if condition is met, we add the new tag to text array by simply call add new tag. Let's give it a save and see in our browser. Let me type random tag. Make sure you don't enter duplicate tag. Then hit comma. Okay, as you can see here, the tag added to the list. One issue that we need to fix is not to include the comma in the tag name. Fixing it is very easy. Before we add the new tag into text array, we'll remove the comma first. We can do that by using slice method. Pass in the first argument 0 and -1 in the second argument. After that, we reassign to the new tag. Let's give it another save and take a look. Alright, now the comma no longer includes in the tag name. In this video, we're gonna see how to beautify our text input so that it will look more professional, like UI plugin that you may found. Okay, before we do that, let's do a couple of things. First, in this div where we use Vue for directive, don't forget to also add key attribute with unique value. the key attribute is primarily used as a hint for Vue's virtual DOM algorithm to identify Vue nodes when diffing the new list of nodes against the old list. The common way is to use the index array. Next, let's wrap the tags list along with the input within a div element. We'll give it a class tags input wrapper. Then, for div element, we'll replace a tag. Let's replace it with span. And we'll give it a class tag item. And for remove button, we'll give it a class remove tag. And for the input, we'll give it a class tag input. Now, since this course is all about Vue.js, I will not show you how to define styles in much detail. Instead, I've already provided the style for you in the course resource, so go ahead and copy the styles. Then, inside this style, we clear the existing style and paste the code. Let's give it a save and have a look. Ta-da! Now our tags input component look much better. Let me add a new tag. Okay, I'll remove it. Okay, our tags input working fine and now looks better. However, our component cannot be reused yet because all tags that we enter in here is still inside of the component. In this lesson, we'll learn about component communication. Component communication is basically how to send data from one component to another. There are a couple of ways doing that, but we'll discuss just two ways: props and events. So, in this lesson, we'll see the type of communication using props, and we'll see the type of communication using events in the next one. So, props allows you to pass any data from the parent component down to a child component. Like data in local component, props are also reactive, allowing a child component to update whenever the parent data changes. Let's go to script section. Then, here we add a new property called props. Inside that, let's add a prop, let's say selected tags. For now, let's print it out in our template. In here. Then, let's go to the component where tags input called. Now, we need to specify what we have defined in props as custom attribute selected tags. Note that the custom attribute name is written in kebab case, although you can also write it in camel case like so, but I prefer this way. Next, let's perform attribute binding in here, and we'll bind with, let's say, JS frameworks. Let's go to script section. Then define local data. And it contains React.js, Vue.js, and Angular. Now, as I mentioned before, that props are also reactive, which will make a child component to update whenever the parent data changes. So here, we'll add mounted hook. This hook is get called when your component is added to the DOM. In here, I'll call JavaScript set timeout, which will execute a function in 3 seconds. Inside the function, we'll add a new item to JS frameworks. Let's give it a save and take a look in our browser. Here are the selected tags, and after 3 seconds, new item will be added. So the changes that occurred in the parent component will update the child component through props. Alright, let's go back to tags input component. Remove the selected tags from template. Let's go to script section. Now, in local data of this component, we'll set the tags initial values from values that come from the parent component. In this case, from selected tags. Since we use this keyword in here, we need to change this data from arrow function to normal function, because this in arrow function has different meaning. Then, since selected tags will receive array data type, here we use spread operator like so. By doing this way, we create a real copy of selected tags array, so whenever we make change the tags array, it will not affect the selected tags value, since it no longer refers to old array address in memory. Let's also change how we define our props from array to object. There are some benefits defining props using object. We can determine the data type of the prop so that we can restrict what sort of data our component receives. So here, let's specify type in array. By doing this way, selected tags only receives array. If we try to enter other data type, we'll get a warning message in the console in our development mode. So if we go to app component, then change this JS frameworks to string. If we give this a save and see in our browser, here our app is broken, and we see in the console a warning message telling us that the expected value is array, not a string. So let me undo the change, then switch back to tags input component, and in here we can also determine if a prop is required or not by adding required property. If we set it with true, that means the prop is required. Otherwise, is not required. We can also give a default value to the prop by adding default. For non-object or non-array such as number, string, or boolean, we can set any value according to the type that we specified, such as 1, true, or empty string. But for object or array, this default should be a function which return a value. For this case, we're going to return an empty array. Since we have default value, we can get rid of this required from here. Let's give it a save and see in our browser. Everything should be fine. Now let's go back to app component. Then try to remove this from here. Okay, it's working just fine. In the last video, we've seen one type of component communication, which is sending data from the parent component down to child component using props. Now in this video, we'll see how to communicate from child component to parent component through custom event. Let's start by opening the app component. Then in template, let's print out the JS frameworks. If we give it a save and take a look in our browser, let's add a new tag. As we can see, the value in here is remain the same, even if we remove the tag. This means all changes only occurred in the tag's input component and it's not affect the parent component. This is actually a normal flow in Vue.js, where any changes that occurred in the child component should not update the parent component's data directly. If we go back to tag's input component and remove this spread operator, everything seems to be fine. However, we should avoid this way because, as I said, a child component should not update the data of the parent component. So, let me undo the last change. And what we need to do here is to emit a custom event to the parent component, which then will listen with the parent component and handling that event to do something else. So let's go to add new tag. Then here we'll emit a custom event using this $emit. We'll specify the custom event name in the first argument. Let's say change. Then in the second argument, we pass in the payload. In this case, these tags. Let's do the similar thing in remove tag method. Just copy and paste in here. After that, we add emits property. Then specify the custom event that we emit in this component. This may not require, but will help other developers to know what custom events that are emitted by this component without need to read entire code of the component. Now, let's go back to app component. Then, we can listen to the custom event that emitted by this component. In this case, change. Let's handle this by calling a method. Let's say handle change. Okay, let's go to script section. Then define methods property. In there, let's define the handle change method, which receives an argument, tags. Inside the method, we assign the JS frameworks with tags. And we'll also use the spread operator. Let's give it a save and take a look. Let me remove this mounted since it no longer used. Okay, now the changes that we make in this tag will reflect in here. Last, let's prove if our tags input component actually reusable. Let's add in data another property, let's say backend frameworks, and we'll set it with empty array. Let's go to template, change this to your favorite frameworks. Let's duplicate these lines. We'll replace the second one with backend frameworks. Now for handle change, we could replace it with other method, or since we only need a simple JavaScript expression, let's do that in here. Backend frameworks equals spread operator, the event object. Okay, let's give it a save and have a look. Okay, everything is working just fine, and we have proof that our tags input component is actually reusable. Our main project is building Vue Drive, a Vue project that is inspired by Google Drive, where we're able to upload some files using upload files button or by drag and drop them. We can cancel the uploading file or re-upload the cancelled file. We can cancel all uploading files or re-upload them. We can toggle the pop-up or abort the uploading files. We can select one or multiple files. We can rename the file name or remove the selected files. We'll be adding to our Vue Drive application advanced feature that allows users to organize their files in folders. User can simply hit this new folder button, enter the folder, then hit create button. Double click on that folder, create a new one, or upload some files. We'll be taking our Vue Drive application to the next level by implementing Vue Router. We'll have My Files page, Recent page, and Start page. No page reloading. We can make selection on files or folders, then tag them as Start. If we go to Start page, here we see the Start folders and files. We can remove files or folders from this page by selecting them, then hit this Remove from Start button.